All right, so flipping your pages over and looking at what happens throughout multiple years, we're really looking at a concept that we call recruitment. So recruitment is the idea that the young actually survives and is recruited into the adult population. When we're talking about population dynamics, there's a few things that matter the most. One is how many young are born in a year per female. That's our natality rate. That's really important. You can't have adults if they're never born. The second thing that's really important is mortality, how many die throughout the year of all your population. And the third thing that's really important is recruitment. How many of those young that were born actually survive to be reproducing adults? If they don't survive to be reproducing adults, they never contribute back into that population. And that is what we want to look at with these 4 graphs or charts. So back with elk again, remember they were born in the springtime. And what was that called when they're born? Oh, that was called our period of natality. And at this time, these are like basically infant elk, if you want to think about that. But in the animal world, we don't say infant, we say neonate. So they're neonates for just a few weeks here at the beginning of their lives. As they become more able to do the same thing as an adult, then they're just juveniles. And so after this point in time, we just call them juveniles. So I'm going to finish this circle out for year 1, and they're juveniles for that whole period, their first year. So they head through that first winter. They come out of that first winter, so they exit this graph here, come on over here. And they come out of that first winter here, and this entire year they are still not reproducing, and so they are still juveniles, okay, for their whole second year. Now, if they didn't have a real strong start, they may die in the spring here. This is the highest mortality for any demographic of elk, and usually most ungulates, is the young at the end of their first year. They think about it, they have to be small to be born, and then they have to get big enough and put on enough fat reserves to survive that whole first winter. So we see really high mortality rates at the end of that first winter. And then coming into their third year, so if they survived, right, so some of them die, if they survive, they're still juveniles. And then they come through their third year. Their springtime, they're still juveniles. But right about fall, when breeding season starts, they are up for grabs. Now, especially the females, they may get bred that first year, they may not. But overall, we're going to call this the period of recruitment. Okay, so at this point, recruitment happens for the majority of the individuals, and now we call them adults. All right, they finish that first winter and they're all adults. Now, it's important to know that that's dependent upon individuals, I guess, and males are less likely to actually be able to breed because they get out competed. So you could continue to call the juveniles. We usually just say they're young bulls at that point and call them adults, even if they didn't technically breed. And then that fourth year, they're just adults that whole time. And at this point, that's what would match up with that first life cycle diagram that we kind of went through, is what happens to an adult animal throughout their year. So at that point in time, we could say that the young that were born here are now recruited fully into the population. You could call it here for springtime when they're going to start having their young, or you could call it here when they're bred. But it's somewhere in that third year, essentially between the third and fourth year, that they're actually recruited into that population. So then I have some questions on the bottom of that sheet, is then how does that affect, knowing that it takes this long, how does that affect a couple other things like survival and population levels? The other thing I want to note is we made this exercise really with ungulates kind of in the forefront of our mind. I did elk, so you have to do something different. You can pick any other ungulate that you want, or you can pick any animal from your list that you'd like to do this for, in which case some things may not apply, and you may find something else that changes seasonally that you want to add to your life cycle diagram, and that's okay. The other thing is, if you're picking something with just they're recruited into the population in the first year, you might not need year 2, 3, and 4, and that's fine. It just needs to be really apparent on year 1 that that's what you're talking about. If you have any questions, email me. I'd be happy to answer them. And you can find pictures of my completed diagrams here on D2L.